Hi, everyone. Welcome to ESOP Radio. We are excited to have M Group join us today. They are based in Campbell, California, which is right close to San Jose, down in the Silicon Valley for those who follow tech. They have offices around the Bay Area, so basically from Silicon Valley up to the wine country. Group is an urban planning firm. They work with some of the major cities in the San Francisco Bay Area, helping them design smart growth plans that balance growth, livability, quality of life, and the environment. Important stuff. Jeff Bradley took the plunge into entrepreneurship in 2006 after a career in city planning, and Heather Hines joined the firm in 2010 with a similar background. Urban planners think decades ahead about land use, infrastructure, and demographics. There are many similarities between the long-term thinking that is baked into M Group's culture and the long-term focus needed for a successful ESOP business. I'm Trevor Gilmore, CEO of Menke.
And I'm Ben Spadt, investment banking with Menke.
And let's dive in. Ben, go ahead and kick it off.
Absolutely. So just to set the stage here, and for people who don't know who the M Group is, what does your firm actually do, and what role do city planners play in shaping and developing communities?
Sure, I'll take that, Ben. So we, as you mentioned, we're an urban planning consulting firm. We are located in the Bay Area, focused on the Bay Area in Northern California. So we have offices in Campbell, Santa Rosa, and Berkeley. We work almost exclusively for public clients. So we work supporting cities and counties throughout the Bay Area. We do a range of service areas in collaboration with public jurisdictions. So we might come on board to help a community project manage a large development project that comes in for processing. A mixed-use lifestyle center that might come in and submit an application. We might help a jurisdiction manage that project. We do long-range policy plans, urban design, so really helping a community with their visioning process. So whether that's where does a community want to be in 20 years, as a whole community, general plan to specific plans, which is looking at a specific area of the city and really diving in deeper to look at the vision for that. It could be a corridor plan with how does a community want an area that maybe has been auto-dominated for years and years and wants to look at things to incorporate, to transition to a more pedestrian-friendly, alternative transportation-friendly area. So we do those kind of policy plans. We also help with implementation. So a jurisdiction might adopt a policy plan, but then it comes down to how do we implement it? How do we make it really happen on the ground? So this might be developing regulations for when something comes in and wants to develop, making sure it's furthering that. It might be programs. We did a lot with during COVID with parklets that you saw throughout jurisdictions to find outdoor spaces for people to gather, to eat, to kind of deal with the pandemic. So some of those kind of programs. And then another thing we do to help jurisdictions is the environmental review. So the state of California has very strict regulations about looking at the environmental analysis of a project. So we help with those kind of things too. So hopefully that gives you a picture of what we do and who we do it with and where we do it.
No, that's a great illustration. And, Trevor alluded to the fact that this company has existed since 2000. Jeff took the plunge, as it were, into entrepreneurship. So in that time span, is there any one project or series of projects that you feel really proud about or really excited about now that you've seen them sort of from inception to maybe implementation and sort of trying to execute on that long-term goal?
Yeah, thanks, Ben. It's a great question. It kind of touches on some of the things Heather was talking about, where as a firm, we do a lot of development review for our client cities and counties. And I'm really proud of some of the really large, complicated, controversial projects that cities have trusted us with throughout the whole Bay Area. Some of the largest projects that get built are managed by M Group planners working for the city or the client. So that's sort of like one type of project that requires a lot of trust on the part of our clients, which we appreciate. And then on the other end, there's been some long-range policy planning projects that Heather also mentioned, where we come in and work very closely with the city on on their vision for where they want to be in 5, 10, 20 years. And again, that requires a lot of confidence of the city that they have the right team. And we've won awards for some of that work in cities like Menlo Park, right here in Campbell for the housing element, a general plan update in Sausalito, and a very effective specific plan that we did for the city of Sunnyvale for the El Camino Real corridor. And so those types of projects are really make a lasting impact and gives us the ability to leverage that into other projects with our other clients and show that we can do the full range of planning services.
Absolutely. And executing that in your own backyard, I mean, you get to enjoy it as well and see that actually happen. So speaking of enjoying it as well, at some point you had the idea to sell to the employees. And when did that become kind of a viable option or seem like a path that was worth exploring?
We've been thinking about it for a long time. The firm itself was founded by myself and Heather Bradley, my wife, who stepped away at the end of last year along with the ESOP coming into fruition. And we had both been in the public sector for 10 years before we started the firm. But even before that, we had both worked for private planning firms on the Central Coast. And one of those firms was an ESOP client who has a similar firm profile as us. They're larger and even more well-established over time. But I've been keeping an eye on them ever since college, essentially, and after, and witnessing their transition. So we always had in the back of our mind that an ESOP would be a good fit for a professional planning firm where the staff itself is really the core of the business. It's not like their overhead or an expense. They really are the engine that makes the business run. In that type of environment, any type of transition can be very disruptive if the original owners are looking to sell to a larger firm. Or a private equity type of situation. The ESOP seemed to be most aligned with our values. And so as we started to approach, retirement age, we realized that that's the way we wanted to make it happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes retirement age is a 4-letter word, but if you have that proper planning in place, that's great. So, you had this idea for a long time, and when you introduced it to the employees, was it well received, or was there a little pushback or questions?
Yeah, I think there was mostly just kind of a little bit of confusion about what it meant, because it sounds really dramatic when you say, we're going to sell the company to the employees, everyone's going to become an employee owner. That people can run with that in different directions of how that would play out in terms of the day-to-day business. Because on the other hand, we're still an S Corp. We still have a management team. We're still running on basic business principles. And so it took a lot of effort to explain what the ESOP is, just functionally and factually, what it does do and what it doesn't do. And I think people have come to terms with it more. We do find that maybe some of the younger planners who aren't so focused on their retirement yet tend to discount it a little bit. And the people that are a little further along in their career can kind of see the value of having something that supplements Social Security, supplements retirement plans, supplements whatever small pension they might have from working in the public sector in the past. All these things kind of build on each other. So I think over time, it'll become more and more apparent to our entire staff what a great benefit it is.
I would add, and this kind of just builds on something Jeff said, I think there was some confusion too in terms of the ESOP structure and overall succession planning. Like the day we closed on the ESOP transaction, was there a change in the way the business ran or who was in charge or who reported to who? And so some of that discussion with the firm and our leadership team and our employee owners was really trying to separate out also the ESOP versus overall succession planning.
Right. Yeah. No, that makes sense because in a typical sale, the owner might just leave, go retire, play golf, whatever. So that can lead to some uncertainty. That's absolutely right. And you had a little bit of a runway because you set up the plan first, the ESOP plan first, but didn't really put any shares into it until years afterwards. And that led to maybe a little bit more of an orderly implementation. And then, through that, there were cash contributions made annually, and without getting into too much of the weeds, but that money was then used to purchase the shares or provide a down payment, as it were. How did you arrive at that decision to set the plan up first, put cash in the plan, and then sell your shares later?
I think for us, Ben, the critical factor is like you said, we weren't going to go off and play golf on day one.
Yeah.
We're in here for a fairly long transition period. And we wanted the firm to be able to operate as close to normally as possible, i.e. pre-ESOP. And we didn't want to have a debt burden that would be, essentially change our culture, and increase our stress level as business managers. So we really saw the future aspect of planning early and the down payment as a way to get the debt down to what we felt was comfortable and not overly stress inducing for the day-to-day operation of the business.
That makes sense. And having that down payment is important, down payment for lack of a better word. But how did those years in between the setup and the actual transaction, were there any changes within the company, whether it financially, functionally, managerially? Because as we've alluded to a little bit here, some of those employees might have been worried about that aspect. And so did you notice any changes that sort of organically happened, or did you have some in mind that you wanted to kind of gradually implement?
I think the main thing is we became a lot more focused on the company's finances. Because Heather and I are first and foremost planners, and we're client facing, so we're still doing the work, and kind of on the side we also manage. But I think our management team especially noticed the difference, that we suddenly became a lot more focused on the monthly revenues, the net income, and they realized there was sort of a shift happening where we were becoming more and more. Like a traditional business, really keeping an eye on the numbers and making small adjustments. As a manager, you feel like it's a small adjustment, but from the employee's perspective, it's like, hey, they took away my favorite coffee or, something.
Right.
And so we got feedback about that. We've always tried to be transparent, but I think the ESOP has given us sort of like permission internally to talk more freely about the business side of the business, rather than always focusing on the planning stuff, which we love.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's been a good benefit, because now I think the employees are getting more information about what makes the company tick and how to keep it going long into the future.
Yeah, and I think it also, the pre-funding, I don't want to say forced, but it pushed us to start talking about it, the ESOP, earlier. Because we were pre-funding and we were saying we're trying to set money away for this pre-funding, or we're looking at our discretionary spending differently, or, those kind of things. And so we had to talk about, well, why are you doing that? I think it also gave us a little bit more of a ramp up to the actual transition or the actual transaction to close as an ESOP. We were making some of those changes. So we were talking about, this is why we're making them, and this is what there's a reason we're doing this kind of dialogue, especially with our leadership team, but firm-wide as well.
Yeah, so the pre-fund really allowed you to have that runway, roll the ESOP out with all the employees, when it was set up in, what was that, 2020?
2023 is when we started.
Okay, 2023. So ESOP, we set it up in 2023, allowed you 3 years of tax deductions, funding. I know you all put millions into that, as a way to have that down payment, and that gave 2 to 3 years of rollout time there with the employees, so that they understand, hey, this is the direction of Vim Group. This is where we're going, giving them comfort. And they started getting those statements too, showing what their allocation was for those years. So compared to some transactions we do where clients go all in 100% right off the bat, this definitely led to an orderly transition, especially on the employee side, right? And then for you all too, saying, hey, let's take a look at the revenues, profit. Let's get to that point that we're comfortable to actually transact and make it happen.
Yep.
When you look back on the years of pre-funding, anything you would do different, in terms of anything from business approach to employee communications, anything that stands out during that initial phase?
I think more outreach. Probably to say the same thing. More outreach to the employees. We get so busy with our planning projects and our business things. It's hard to stay on top of the communications strategy. But I think the more the better. We probably should have been sending out updates like every month at least, or every few weeks, because there was always things happening. And I think the employees and the management team, they really like to know what's going on.
And I think also, I think we were chatting about this a little bit before we started. It's a complex process. There's all sorts of nuance to an ESOP. And so I also feel I totally agree with Jeff, more communication. And also there were times that we thought we understood and would answer a question, and then we realize, oh, that's not quite right. We need to go back and circle back on that to correct ourselves. And so I don't know how exactly to do that differently if we were to go back and do it, but understanding it better ourselves, some of the nuances of it to better communicate it as well.
Yeah, and hindsight's always 2020, right? And it's you're in that pre-fund phase, and figure out, hey, how do we communicate this? What information should we share now? What shouldn't we?
Right.
That's always a tough one to ultimately figure out and act on.
Yeah,
because you want certainty, and with the transaction, you have to get through the negotiation. And once you get that term sheet, then you have certainty of the deal.
And there's some information that's too much information or too detailed information. It's kind of being thoughtful about, not in an effort to not be transparent and not to share, but if you don't have the foundation of what an ESOP is and how it operates, then some of the sending lots and lots of detail about nuances, you're kind of missing.
Yeah, and we find in our client base, it takes employees a few years to really get the hang of it. They need to get several statements under their belt, hear the story, get those touch points, whether it's quarterly, monthly, whatever that cadence is. And also, the longer they're employed and closer they get to retirement, that's when a lot of people start caring. So you take a look at age groups. That's usually when the ESOP becomes very important, because you're like, hey, retirement isn't that far away. What do I have accrued so far in my K, in my IRA, in my ESOP account? And having the ESOP account skin in the game, being vested with the company and tied to its success, that tends to be a win-win at that point. So I know earlier you mentioned, hey, some of the younger employees are very much focused on the cash compensation versus the ESOP. Of course, though, Jeff, you worked for an ESOP company when you were younger, and you probably liked that when you left and got that rollover, right? Or figured out what you wanted to do with it, and then at that point, that's when it'll become real for them. It's like, hey, this is real money. And I know the benefit rate that you all pay out, and it's meaningful. It's, it's not, pennies, so the employees are accruing a nice balance there, which is awesome to see.
Yeah.
I want to touch base on a trend we're seeing out there. Is more and more Generation X, so Gen X business owners and leaders of companies using the ESOP model earlier. Our company, Menke, has been around for a while now, 52 years, and I've been here 11. And when I first joined, a lot of our clients were very much baby boomers, well past retirement age, doing the ESOP because, hey, I need to do something, let's do this ESOP. We're noticing a trend past several years, much younger client base, very intentional about their planning. And obviously M Group, you fit that profile to a T. And it sounds like you got exposed to the whole ESOP concept early on, and that's how you got exposed. Hey, this could be a possibility there. But I'm curious if seeing how older generations handled retirement and succession and just long-term planning, if that shaped your idea too, to say, hey, I want to create a strategy now versus wait several years.
Yeah, I hadn't really thought about this, Trevor, until I read your prompt for this question. But after reflecting on it, to compare the generations, if you will, I think our parents' generations really identified with their work. Their work was sort of their whole self identity almost. And so in that kind of framework, you don't easily, give it up. And so I think that's why we see these sort of, almost a stereotype of the person working, way past normal retire, any conception of a normal retirement age, and just, they just work, 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 work. And I think our generation kind of saw that in our parents. Like my dad basically had the same job for 50 years, working at a community college as an instructor. And he loved it. When he stopped working, that's kind of like when he started going downhill. But he was really invested in his self-conception as professor at a college for a long time. And I think the following generations have a more nuanced view of like work is just like one part of your life. It's not like it's not your whole identity. I think that way maybe we were more open to thinking about transition at an earlier age than some of the prior groups going through.
Yeah, thanks for that, Jeff. And I was speaking with one of my friends last week who had a career in tech and retired younger than, most people. But her whole point is, I didn't retire. I just am focusing on different things.
They just stopped working.
She was very against the word retirement.
Right.
I was like, hey. She's like, no, I'm on the board of, a nonprofit, humane society, so on and so forth, doing all these activities. I'm not retired. To me, sounds like I'm done.
You put your feet up. Yeah.
So I think that to your point, the kind of identity, just tying it to doing one thing could be shifting a bit, and it's, hey, there's all these different aspects to life and work means so many different things.
Right.
I think also for our size company, and as, the owners started looking towards retirement, we're a relatively small company. And so there's a big sense of wanting to plan. We are planners too. So wanting to plan it so that it felt like everyone was kind of taken care of, or there was an attempt to keep that foundation, keep who we were with M Group. And so, yes, Jeff hasn't yet left to go play golf. And for some reason, that's not what I picture Jeff doing when he does. But, when you're with a smaller company, it's not just like, oh, this person leaves and somebody else and everything just keeps. We felt a need to think about it holistically and think about what Jeff and Heather had, founded back in 2006, in which we've all worked across all levels, all of our employee owners, what we've created and what's the best way to keep that foundation there and keep that culture there and have the stability so that, for instance, when Jeff does decide to retire, he feels really good about it and not like he's leaving his team, with uncertainty or anything like that. So I think that also pushed us. Yes, I agree with what Jeff said. And we definitely see that there's more of a desire to think about life, not as you are who you are at work, and that's your full identity, but also I think the structure and the size of our firm really lent itself for us to think about it earlier.
Yeah, culture is so hard to define, but culture makes or breaks companies and makes or breaks ESOP companies as well, right? And having that culture you just described, keeping the company independent, caring for everyone has skin in the game. You're doing interesting, cool, creative work, helping cities think about the future. I mean, ESOP model sounds to be ideal at the end of the day.
You should come over and write marketing copy for us, Trevor.
And Jeff, instead of golf, I think you would run. I think you started doing international marathons, right? You're a runner.
Not international, just marathon.
Just marathons. Yeah.
California.
Awesome. And it's been, we're recording this, March 19th, 2026. So it's almost been a year since the ESOP came in and bought all the stock of the company. So you're basically there at that 1 year of it actually owning the whole company. How have the employees reacted to that news? Was there excitement, fear, all the above? And then it's a question number one. And then two, have you been able to take a deep breath since then? I know when you go through these transitions, a lot of work, due diligence, answering questions, that pop up and so on. It's, a lot of intensity for several months. Have you been able to get back to just focus on the business, and how has that felt? Or do you miss the whole transaction thing? And if so, we might need to hire you to help us on deals.
You want to take that one, Heather?
I don't miss the transaction piece of it. I mean, I learned a lot. It's kind of like when you buy a house, right? And that paperwork that you're like, do I really have to read all this? So that was a process glad we did it. Don't know if I'm dying to go through that process again. Learned a lot. I think that, I think some employees have been really vocal about their excitement about the ESOP. I've had a number of people, the now employee owners just come up and say, thank you. I recognize that was something you guys didn't have to do. And I appreciative of it. I think some people still aren't fully like, what does this mean for me? I think this year is going to be a big change to those statements that you mentioned, Trevor, because this will be the first time our annual statements will come out for 2025, where it's actually showing your shares, as opposed to the previous 2 years, it was showing a cash balance based on the pre-funding. There's going to be a shift there. And I would imagine that will be kind of a discussion topic with the larger team to understand, why does this look so different this year? That's kind of getting used to that, and then seeing the value of the company reassessed each year and what that means with their shares and their vesting. So I think there's a lot of learning curve to come. We definitely are focused on, the company and, running the company as best we can, and doing the very best we can on behalf of all of the employee owners that we now have, a group of, I think we're 43, right around there. So that's our focus.
I think what Heather touched on a little earlier, like when that transition happened, it was sort of some of the immediate topics that were coming up were around succession planning. And at first we're like, well, why are we talking about this? But we realized that just when you explain the ESOP and you start talking about retirement for the employees and retirement for the owners, everyone just assumes that, okay, this is what the owners are doing so they can exit. Just to be more intentional and more deliberate around talking about succession planning, which I think was great because it gave a lot of unanswered questions. But then other people started being more open with their retirement plans. So as a firm, we could start to actually think about, replacing people when they retire, in 2029 or 2032, and really extend that planning metaphor, being able to actually plan for these kind of things that otherwise could just kind of happen with 2 weeks notice or whatever. So I think it's kind of changing the culture of the firm in that way, that people are being more comfortable talking about sort of their long range.
That's great. So increased transparency in essence.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're working at a consulting firm or any company for that matter, and relatively new, people don't know how to ask about succession. I rewind, years ago when I was at a consulting firm, and the owners, we question, hey, what happens when they retire, right? Everyone was too afraid to ask,
Right. You can't even think about that.
You can't even think about that. Yeah, exactly. Well, the thinkable happen, so ESOP transition allows, tone at the top. If we're talking about that, it kind of opens it up, right?
Yeah.
It makes it less taboo.
And that
Right.
feeling of if you're sharing with me, I'll share with you. Kind of, I think that's really spot on, Jeff, that it increased that transparency as we increase the transparency about succession planning from those top positions. I think it allowed other people to feel open to sharing that as well.
Have you noticed at all after going ESOP, any of the clients, if they think it's a great thing, if they notice, does that aspect come in at all when you bid for work, have those discussions with the cities?
Yeah, I've had some experience with that, Trevor, where I'll be meeting with a client and talking about some immediate planning need they have, and then they'll suddenly say, "Oh yeah, we saw something about your email, your employee owned now. We think that's great. It really gives us confidence." That's happened more than once, and it's been a really great response we've had, I think, from our clients, the ones that have spoken about it.
And we have it all over our marketing and, on our proposals too, trying to.
And how about from a recruiting perspective as well? Have you found with prospective employees, being an ESOP company, you think of the ESOP compensation, it doesn't show up on your W-2, but it's material, and you get the statement once a year, and the total comp package is your W-2 pay plus, the ESOP. Has that come into play at all? Helping, because I know it's a very competitive job market, and then you all are in such a niche as well field, if that has been a competitive advantage at all.
I would like to think so, but I would have to go back and talk to our HR person and see how that's factored in. We haven't been doing a ton of hiring. Most of it's been kind of at the very entry level, or people who have decades of experience. But I think over time it'll help with both recruitment and also retention, obviously. But yeah, we'll have to kind of keep an eye out on that, because that would be our goal, is to make us the employer of choice and be able to compete with not only other consulting firms for the best planners, but also with the cities themselves, who obviously hire a lot of planners. Heather, Trevor was asking if we'd seen a benefit on the recruitment side of new hiring, having that ESOP structure in place. Since then, just a handful.
That's great. I know I've seen a few posts on LinkedIn, the past several months, some hiring out there. That's great to hear. And I know we're up here at time. Any final parting tips for anyone listening that might be considering an ESOP?
I think the thing Heather and I talked about before this interview was, even though we felt like we got an early start, you couldn't really start too early. You could, there's so, like Heather talked about, there's so much to learn about the ESOP process. I find the history of ESOPs is interesting material as well, how they came about. I think any business owner who has any inkling of awareness of they need an exit strategy and a succession plan, they should at least educate themselves on an ESOP, so they're aware of it. For what will probably be their biggest. They say that when people buy their home, that's their biggest transaction. For business owners, this is probably the biggest transaction they'll ever do. You can't, even if you're in your 20s or 30s and you're a business owner, you should know about this. Absolutely.
So plan early, plan often. Right. Hopefully you had an espresso and some tasty Roman treat in hand. I do recall that, though. We're like reaching out to Heather here in Rome, when in Rome. Thank you, Jeff and Heather, for your time today. Thanks for this insightful discussion. And we've often said ESOPs are for the doers, the builders, and the planners. Having skin in the game is real. Today's discussion is living proof. Thanks for joining ESOP Radio, and check us out on Menke.com, LinkedIn, Spotify, Apple, or YouTube. Also check out M Group. Check them out on their website. They do really interesting and cool work. And if you're in the Bay Area, they probably helped some aspect of the cool new design of your city. Thanks, everyone. Have an awesome day.
Thank you.